I really loved sharing on this section of Galatians with everyone. I think it feels like one of those little sections that is a bit of housekeeping for Paul, or just something to get out the way before you get to the main message. But you can see that he's written that letter with quite a bit of haste and urgency. And so I feel like if he's putting that right in the beginning, there's got to be something in there for us that he's really laying a foundation for what he's talking about in the rest of the book. It's kind of the key to the rest of the book, I think. And so, yeah, I think he's dealing there with an issue of division, a theological issue. We don't know anything about those. Now, of course, we do. And I really love how he's detailed how he's dealt with that issue. And the two things that it really came down to for me was God's process and God's people. And if there's anything that I really hope people take away from this, is to embrace God's process and embrace God's people. In whatever God has called you to, embrace his process and embrace his people. And so here you can see Paul's ministry didn't just happen in a few years in the same way that we see Jesus' ministry, his time of active ministry. Paul, he says first 3 years later, and then he says 14 years later. And so if you're in that 14 years later stage of God's process, take heart. And also what I love about Paul is that he gathers a team. And so you see, first he goes to see the guys at Jerusalem, and then later he takes Titus and Barnabas, and later they do have some challenges, but he's gathering a team. Later you see Timothy. He's a father who's really trying to father people in ministry and trying to pass on this message to faithful people who will take it further. And so sometimes there are times and seasons to be on someone else's team, the team that someone else has gathered. And that's such an incredible blessing and a privilege to have that opportunity to team up with someone in what God has called them to do. And then there's also times and seasons where God will call you to gather a team. And I love how Paul does that, and how he's always trying to discharge what God has given him to faithful people who will take it further. And so what he doesn't do is just go it alone and just think he can do it. Nothing of significance ever happened by someone just going it alone. Even if it looks like it, even if it's written that way in the history books, they never really just went it alone. There was a whole lot that worked in towards that time of that person being actually able to do the thing that they did. A whole lot of effort, a whole lot of relationships, a whole lot of people, and conflict as well. Resolved conflict, working through things that helped that person to get to that point. And so if you're looking at the things that God has called you to do and you're tempted to go it alone, because sometimes these relationship things can be really messy, I'd encourage you to embrace God's people and embrace God's process. Find a team, build a team, grow a team, because that's how significant things happen in the kingdom. And so my question is, what teams are you currently on, where you are the team that's been gathered to further something, and in what places should you be gathering a team to do the thing that God has called you to do? And also then, in what places are you part of God's process in that 14 years? I think just take some time to think about that and trust God. Ask God, what is the next step right now? I don't need to know 2 years time, 5 years time, 10-year plan. Right now, God, what do you need me to do? And if he's saying, I'm calling you there, start preparing now, then start preparing now. That's all. Just do what he's called you to do right now. Just be faithful with what he's given you right now. Be faithful on the team that he's given you right now. Be faithful on the team that you're on right now. And great things can happen in those 14 years. And great things can happen after those 14 years. I trust this message was valuable to you. It really has been very valuable to me. Thanks for listening.